I'm Howard Wilson, CFO of PagerDuty, and excited to welcome you to this panel discussion, Bring Yourself, Creating an Inclusive and Diverse Work Culture. People do their best work when they feel they can be themselves, and where the work culture is inviting, diverse, and inclusive. Much has been written about psychological safety in the workplace, and each and every one of us has a role to play. What more, though, can we do in how we think and how we act to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion for all? How can we create more belonging and strengthen allyship? I would call on everyone in the audience to think of one change they can make in thinking or action in line with this theme. To explore this topic, I am delighted to be joined by Peter Arvai, Executive Chair and Co-founder of Prezi, and Gail Frederick, SVP Engineering Developer Experience at Salesforce. Thank you both for being customers of PagerDuty, but more importantly, thank you for leading the way personally and professionally in driving change and championing the rights of others. So let me introduce you to Peter and Gail. Peter co-founded and led Prezi as CEO during its first 12 years. Prezi, with over 100 million users, has created the world's largest library of publicly available presentations. And with many billions of views, this makes Prezi one of the most widely spread brands to have originated from Hungary. In 2015, Peter became the first visible openly gay CEO in Central and Eastern Europe. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Gail has a distinguished career as an engineer and engineering leader over the past 2 decades, from reinventing eBay's public APIs and developer ecosystem to leading platform engineering for Salesforce developer experience across a broad portfolio of tools, services, and products. Gail has a strong focus on keeping developers happy, building a positive developer experience, and this is manifest in how she approaches the workplace as an openly gay leader. Gail lives with her wife and twins and a golden doodle puppy in Portland, Oregon. So welcome, Gail.
Thanks for having me, Howard. I'm delighted to be here.
It's great to have both of you here. I feel so honored to be able to have this discussion with you. And I think our audience is really going to benefit from hearing about your experiences and being able to understand a little bit of what has led you down your path. So maybe, Peter, we can start off with you. To set the scene, can you tell us about your coming out that led to you uniquely being the first openly gay CEO in Central and Eastern Europe?
Sure. Well, and in many ways, I was incredibly fortunate because I had support all along the way, from my immediate family to my friends, and then crucially, my co-founders and the Prezi team. So, of course, being the first one to take a step in that region, we had to be thoughtful, and I felt there was a responsibility. I was, of course, concerned that there might be a lot of criticism, but contrary to my expectations, it was actually less criticism than what I expected. And there was a lot of positive energy that came from it in the team as well. Obviously, if we as a company at Prezi say that we want to be inclusive of all, then me not being forthright about my own identity would send a mixed signal. So I think me taking the step helped people to feel like everyone really was welcome and included in the company. And also for our offices in Budapest and in Riga, where this was an important human rights question, I think people were very proud to participate in the visibility that came from it.
I think that's amazing, Peter, because I think you make a very important point around people being able to feel comfortable with who they are. And when they see leaders who are comfortable, it certainly sends a very strong message. What were some of the challenges, though, in taking this step?
Yeah, I think for any person taking this step, there's two factors that are important to consider, at least, and for some there are probably many more. But two main things that often come up is, well, what is the conversation like in society? How are we talking about this topic? And that's an important reference point. But the second is obviously, what do my colleagues, what do my friends at work think about me making a move like this? And I would emphasize that that closer group of people may be even more influential in a way than the larger societal conversation. So what you say in a meeting, and it can be very subtle and small things. Are you even asking the question about how we include people? Are you thinking about how what you can do and mentioning something to make more people feel represented? Those are things that if you have somebody in your team that might be closeted right now, they will pay attention to what you say and do in these moments.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And that leads into a question that I wanted to ask you, Gail, because I know you spoke about when we met previously around how often you were, as an engineer, you were a woman engineer, a gay woman engineer, and often you felt as though you were the only person in the room. So what was your experience like? And leveraging on what Peter said about sometimes other people's support is important. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, well, I graduated from engineering school in 1998. And then for the first 10 years of my career, I was working as an engineer. And often I was the only female engineer. And that was actually true for my undergrad also. There were probably 5 women and 500 men. And in the beginning, I felt pretty isolated. I got to be honest with you, the toughest thing was these architectural conversations where you put a bunch of men in a room and add me, and it was pretty tense. And I think that was like natural functioning of a group of men, but it felt really scary to me. And but eventually I found, I joke about having a big girl voice, and I found my big girl voice in those. And I had some weird experiences, like men saying, "Oh no, stop talking, Gail. I'll tell you what Gail needs to say." And so I figured out how to be alpha over time. But I do think that when I eventually came out at work, I was on my 4th of 4 companies created by the same venture capitalist, and a couple of men who were his vice presidents in these companies. And those guys were great. And they were when I finally came out to them, they were like, "Yes, we know." We were waiting for you to tell us. And their like love and inclusion really helped me find my space and helped me feel valued. I mean, also, like, I was a very good developer back in the day. It was one of my favorite things to do. And so being different but being great at something was a really good combination. And there was just this great trust with these leaders, and I think of them today still. I call them my old white mentors, but they opened the door to me, and so it was hard, but it helped me grow. And now you can put me in a room with any CEO and I will be just fine.
I think it's so beautiful that you say that, Gail, because I often say that it was straight people that made the first openly gay CEO in Central and Eastern Europe. And really, I think that that kind of support is so central in taking the step.
And yeah, allies are powerful, and allyship is powerful. And I think it's our responsibility now that we have the influence and the control and the power to do the same thing for the next generation.
Yeah, that's great, Gail. A fun fact about Gail, which I think our developer audience would be interested in, is Gail actually has some of her code in the Smithsonian Institute. Do you want to just give us a quick 30 seconds on how that came about?
It's true. That first job where I met that venture capitalist and met my old white mentors was in around like 1999 or 2000. The Smithsonian came looking for artifacts about the 4th industrial revolution in technology. And they came to our company and we licensed them a copy of our code base. And now it's in the Smithsonian. And I haven't found it there, but it's really cool to know that a little bit of what I did is in American history.
Yeah, well, that's great to know. And I think another piece of history that's interesting is the work that you did on at eBay around reinventing their API environment has contributed to the delivery of over 1 billion pieces of PPE in the pandemic. So you've got some interesting, distinguished trademarks around your work. So thank you for that, Gail. The one question I did have for you, Gail, is what are some of the things that you've done now to try and create a more inclusive and diverse environment since you've benefited from that experience yourself?
Well, I think the most important thing that I do is I talk to my team, and especially I find the youngest members of my team, and I love mentoring tomorrow's leaders and helping them find their voice in the company and helping them see that their uniqueness, what is the Borg thing? I'm going to add you to our uniqueness. Like that can be true in a corporate context. And the other thing that I do is, I am interviewing vice presidents and senior vice presidents a ton for Salesforce and in previous roles. And what I love to do, I always ask the question, how have you materially moved the needle for diversity and inclusion in your companies? Generally, there's silence. And then we have a conversation about what they could be doing with mentoring and sponsoring, with talking about what's unique and vulnerable about themselves to make space for others to feel that way, and about creating programs for underrepresented folks to have a direct path to leadership. And then I get these sort of embarrassed looks, and then I think they've gotten the point. And whether they join the company or not, I've created hopefully another leader who thinks about this stuff. And then when we find someone who has a really good answer, then we know that if the rest of your portfolio works out, we know you're going to join us on this journey of equality.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I love that approach. I think it really does. It helps people, rethink or makes them pause and consider exactly what they're doing. So, Peter, this brings me to the question. I know that you're also the founder of an organization, We Are Open, which represents, I believe, over 1,000 different companies today, furthering the cause of diversity and inclusion. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes, it's an organization for companies that stand up for diversity and inclusion in Central and Eastern Europe. And it came from our experiences with Pride. So Prezi was actually the first company to join with the company logo and Budapest Pride. We did that for a few years, and it was frustrating to be the only company there. But fortunately, I managed to convince Google and a Hungarian company called Espel to come together. Then we could be already a small group. We put up a web page, and we said any company who stands up for diversity and inclusion in their companies can just sign up with their logo. And by the time a few weeks later Pride came, already 450 companies had signed up, which doesn't mean obviously that all of them joined Pride immediately, but year after year that has grown. And just this last Pride pre-pandemic, we had actually 120 CEOs of global and local companies signing their support for Budapest Pride and the LGBTQ cause in a 2-page fold-out in the Forbes magazine in Hungary. So change can be done, and yes, we have over 1,000 companies there now representing over 100,000 employees.
Wow.
That's
well,
incredible.
We can only applaud that, Peter. That really is amazing. Let's maybe shift our topic, because I think this ties in with this around allyship. Like allyship, both of you have mentioned the importance of allies. How do you think allies can do more, or how do you think we can harness the power of allies more effectively?
To me, allyship is great if you are helping, but it's even better if you're using your position in the majority to kick the door open. And so I think that, at Salesforce, we have a lot of what we call equality groups, and we are very explicit about inviting allies to join us. And to me, I think you can be an ally for any kind of person. And one thing that I like to do in my team is talk about how inclusion is not just for people like me. Inclusion is for people of all kinds of faiths. Inclusion is for people all across the political spectrum. And if we can make every individual feel like they can bring their whole self to work, then we're going to create, not only will you be happier as a human being at work, but you'll create better products and you'll form these strong bonds. One thing that we did at my staff meeting back at eBay was we had folks who spoke Arabic as a first language and Hindi as a first language and Spanish as a first language. And we took a whole staff meeting and we just wrote our names in all of those scripts. And it was such a lovely way to introduce cultures to each other in a really sort of welcoming way. And I think there's a lot of creative things that can be done to just build bridges.
Yeah, I think that's great. I often think about being able to shift from being supportive to being an advocate, right? And actually taking action. Because it's great to say, maybe your thought is that, hey, I agree conceptually, I'm okay in supporting diversity and inclusion, but the power lies in acting. And you've seen that in case of people who sponsored you, people who are prepared to speak out. I think that's where a lot of the power lies. Peter, you had a comment there, I think.
I think it's also just good to be aware of some facts. So it is Pride now, and LinkedIn asked in the LinkedIn network how many people are closeted right now in the US, and about a quarter of the currently self-identified LGBTQ plus people are closeted. Half of them actually say that if a new employer would know about their identity, they would feel like they had a lesser chance of getting the job. And you might also just reflect on how many people is touched by this, because we have some estimations from the 50s and 60s when we asked military personnel in the US, around 5%. But if you look at just the last year's survey, and for Generation Z, that's people who were born from 97 and on, actually up to 60% say that they belong to the LGBTQ community. So this is a significant portion of our population. And in that sense, whenever we have a chance in a meeting to raise a question on, hey, are we really thinking about things in an inclusive way? Or is there something we can do to have better representation? I do think that there might be a person next to you who is in the closet right now thinking about should they dare taking this step or not. And your way of handling this kind of situation will definitely matter.
Yeah, thanks.
Well said.
Thanks so much for that, Peter. Yeah, I think it's also about leading with empathy. So we're down to just kind of our final minute or so. So maybe each of you want to give one quick call to action for our audience. Maybe Gail, to start with you.
My call to action is use your position to kick open the door for your diverse friends, however you and your friend define diversity. Like, I think it's all of our responsibility to find somebody and lift them up with you.
Thanks, Gail. And Peter, final thoughts from you.
Find an opportunity today in a group conversation to mention perhaps pride or some other topic of inclusion.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And I think so often allies don't vocalize their support for diversity and inclusion, whether it's the LGBTQ plus or whether it's supporting racial equality, but often that voice being heard has an immense amount of power, and then taking the action. Well, I'd like to thank both of you. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to be able to chat with you about what's a very important topic for us, and that's really about allowing people to bring themselves to the workplace and to create an inclusive and diverse work environment. So thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here at PagerDuty.